Okay, so now that we have a producer working and several demos working, I'm going to create a new Java class, and this one is going to be called consumer demo. Press enter, and here we go. We have a PSVM, and we'll just have a system.out.println hello world just to make sure that our code is working. I'm going to run this, and as expected, we see hello world. Okay, we're ready to code. So the first thing I want to do is create a logger, and this logger should be from import class, and it should be a org.slf4j. I did Alt Enter to get to this screen, and here we go. And now we do equals logger factory dot get logger, and we'll do consumer demo dot class dot get name. Okay, so now we have a logger. Now the next thing I have to do is likewise create properties. So we'll do properties equals new properties and press tab to get autocomplete. Okay, so what are these properties? If we go to Kafka and scroll a little bit more down on this list, and it's a long list of settings you can see, we have new consumer configs. And this is the one you want to use. So there's a key deserializer and a value deserializer. So we'll explain this in a second. Bootstrap servers, as we expect, and group ID, as we expect as well. So all of this looks like a good beginning. There's another one we may want to look at as well, and it's called auto offset reset. So let's have a look at all these things one by one. The first thing I want to do is do properties.setProperty. And the same way we had producer config, here we have consumer config dot, and here we have bootstrap server. And we'll create a variable bootstrap servers, and this is equal to 127.001.9092. And we'll just use that one right here. Okay, so this looks good. Next, I want to create my second property. So my property is going to be a deserializer. So consumer.key deserializer class config. And this one is going to be a string deserializer this time. So .class.getName. And so the reason we do this is that basically when the producer takes a string, serializes it to bytes and sends it to Kafka, when Kafka sends these bytes right back to our consumer has to take these bytes and create a string from it. And that process is called deserialization. So this is why we provide a string deserializer. Now we'll do the same for the value deserializer. So consumer config dot value deserializer, and we'll create a string deserializer dot class dot get name. Okay, so this is the basic configs. So we create consumer configs. As I mentioned, there are two other configs we want. So the first one is going to be the group ID. So consumer config dot group ID config. And this one we'll set to group ID, and we'll just define right above what group ID is. So group ID is equal to my fourth application, for example. Okay, and here's my fourth application. So this is the group ID we'll use. Now, the last thing we may want to have very obviously is consumer config dot, and this is called auto offset reset config. So I'll press tab, and you have three different values. You can have earliest, or you can have latest, or you can have none. And so obviously you can't have them with a slash. I'm just showing them to you right now. So earliest means that you want to read from the very, very beginning of your topic. While latest is going to be when you read from only the new messages onwards. And none will throw an error if there's no offsets being saved. So usually you want earliest or you want latest, okay? And so because we want to see some data for us, we'll create it as earliest. So here we go, we have created consumer config. Now we have to create a consumer. We'll have to subscribe the consumer to our topic. And I put an S on this because it could be multiple topics. And then poll for new data. Okay, so let's have a look at these. To create a consumer, we do Kafka consumer tab, string, because we are going to read strings. So string, consumer is equal to new. So I'll go to the next line, new Kafka consumer. And in there, I have to pass my properties. So I actually don't need to go to the next line. It fits just right. Okay. Now we have created our consumer. As I said, we have to subscribe the consumer to our topic. So consumer dot, and there's a subscribe API, which can take either a pattern or a collection of topics. So let's use a collection of topics, and we'll do collections dot singleton, and then we'll create the topic first. We'll put the topic first topic. So I'll have here string topic equals first topic, and use it right here. So by doing collections at singleton, we basically are saying that we only subscribe to one topic, but you could definitely subscribe to more topics. For example, doing arrays. So I'll show you arrays as list, and here we can have first topic, and you could very much have second topic and as many topics as you want. So I'll keep it like this, okay? So this looks good. And now we need to get data. So the consumer does not get until data until it asks for that data. So we'll have a true, while true loop. And this is quite bad in programming because you have to break out of the while loop. But for now, this is enough just for our understanding, okay? And by the way, this is the topic right here as an argument. Okay, so we have while true. And what we have to do is consumer.poll. And we have to give a timeout to the poll. So we'll give the poll a chance to complete in 100 milliseconds. Now, as you can see, poll is deprecated. So this is something new in Kafka, Kafka 2.0.0. Poll has a bit changed. And so it used to be able to take a long as a timeout, so just a number. But now the non-deprecated version uses a duration. So we have to create a duration object. And so for this, we have to use duration dot of, so we have to import this, duration of milliseconds, and we pass in 100. Now this is not happy because it says usage of API documented as since 1.8. So I'll do Alt Enter and I'll set the language to 8, like this. So what this has done now, because the language is set to 8, is that if we go to pom.xml, it has added a build block right here where it says that the Maven compiler plugin should be of version number 8. So this is saying force Java 8 usage in our code. So very important. So here we have consumer.poll, duration of milliseconds, and the return type of this is going to be a consumer records string. So we'll do consumer records with an S, string, and we'll call this records is equal to this. We'll make the imports, we'll make the import, so here, imported, and I'll just go to the next line just to be super clear around what this does. Okay, so consumer records equals consumer.poll, and duration, we have to use duration now in Kafka 2.0.0 of milliseconds 100. So we give a timeout of 100 milliseconds, and now we have to look into these records. So for record, consumer record in the records, okay, this is a way to do a for loop and iterate over the records. We can look at this record and print stuff from it. So this record has a value, has a key, has an offset, a partition, etc., etc. So this consumer record, by the way, it's going to be a consumer record string. Okay, so we can say logger.info value a key, and then we'll pass in the key record.key, and then we can maybe say value being equals to record.value. Maybe we want to print more information. We'll say logger.info partition is going to be record.partition. And we can also add maybe an offset information to be record. So offset being record.offsets. So this looks good. We are reading keys and values and we're printing partitions and offsets. So this should work in its own. So let's have a look and see if things work. So I'll go ahead and click on play and run this code. And so if everything is happy, we should see in a second all the data flow into our code. And here we go. So we have all the data that flew into our consumer demo. And so you can go through the messages, but at first we had a key equals null and the value was what we wrote. And that was partition 0, offset 0. And then we kept on writing some values, okay? So a lot of stuff that happened. And then we get partition 1, partition 2. And so as you could see in there, the consumer first read all the values from partition 0, okay? All the values from partition 0. Then it went on to partition 1. So it read all the values from partition 1. Then it went on to partition 2 and got all the values from partition 2. And that's just how the consumer works, okay? If you run the producer demo right here, so you right click on say producer demo with keys and we'll run this one, okay, in parallel. So now the producer demo keys has run. And if we look at the consumer right here, so let me just add a few lines so we see exactly what happens. I'll run this again. So this is run. And now we look at from where I did some new lines. So we can see that we are reading now partition 1, 0, 2, 0, 2, 2, 0, and so on. So we are reading really messages as they arrive to our consumer. So that's about it for a consumer. You can play with it a little bit. And if you want to stop it, you should click the exit sign, for example. And that's it. This is for the basics of consumer. Obviously, we're going to add a little bit of complexity in the next lecture.